Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy. Up first graphic fire danger showing quite an improvement occurring up there in the north. Just a couple of small areas south of the Yukon River that's classified as extreme now, with high to very high fire danger continuing, though, up there in the Yukon Flats and south of the Eastern Brooks Range. And to a lesser extent, still some areas of high fire danger in and around the Fairbanks area, and then also out there Norton Bay and inland across the eastern Seward Peninsula. And that's about it. Wetting rains occurring across the area, especially the west central interior areas at, for example, the Holy Cross and Flathead wetting rains. And so continues to improve, but still no precipitation in the forecast for the area there, upper Yukon Valley area. Forecast to remain dry in another couple of days with highs in the 70s. Now for the hazardous weather graphics, there are no watches, warnings, or advisories out anywhere in the state for the next 24 hours or so. So moving on to satellite imagery, not a lot to look at on here. You can see clouds moving westward from Canada there, across the northern southeast coast, and pushing in higher clouds into the Copper River Basin area as showers and thunderstorms develop once again over the Kenai Peninsula, Talkeetnas along the Alaska Range, and also there south and east of the Yukon River into the Kuskokwim Valley. And that you can see that area kind of extending back to the north and northeast toward the Arctic Village area, with clearing skies there. So Sitna Valley down into Anchorage, Kenai Peninsula, toward Kenai, mostly sunny afternoon today. Temperatures 60s, and again lower 70s in the Fairbanks area on up into the upper Yukon Valley. Pretty nice day there over the western Seward Peninsula, so some sunshine. And also clear skies reported from Tin City all the way down across St. Lawrence Island, Gamble, and Savunga. And looks clear up there over the northwest interior. But low clouds and fog showed up along the Arctic coast and to a certain extent over the North Slope today, with winds down from what they were over the eastern Arctic coast, down to like 20 to 25 miles an hour. Otherwise, we've got a system bringing some light rain and fog, pretty persistent, to the Fox Islands there as it drops southeastward over to about the Cold Bay area. Otherwise, you can see the outer cloud shield of a next front that's trying to push in toward the western Aleutians later on tonight and tomorrow. And heaviest rainfall fell over the northern panhandle areas, with Juneau today picking up about half an inch of precipitation during the 12-hour period ending at 3 p.m., while Petersburg got about 0.4 of an inch, as well as Gustavus, much lighter amounts, more showery or nothing at all down toward Ketchikan, Metlakatla, and Net. And rolling this through again, you can see the westward track of that moisture, with some showers in the Copper River Basin there and moisture in toward Yakutat. Otherwise, not a bad day for Kodiak Island. Kind of some clearing occurring there. And thunderstorms again developed over the southern Kenai Peninsula in the hills between Deep Creek and Anchor Point there just north of Homer. Kind of a cluster going on there. And also up into the Susitna Valley, Talkeetna seeing some lightning strikes, eastern Alaska Range, and as far west as in the Lotto Hills, with showers in between there, showers anywhere in the green shaded area from that 1,009 millibar low just south of the west central Brooks Range all the way down toward Togiak and western part of Iliamna Lake, but generally dry, Kodiak Island, King Salmon, on down Pilot Point, Port Hayden, and about 1/10 of an inch of rain fell at Cold Bay today. And conditions improving, a little breezy at Akanatka, but not all that strong. Wind's really a non-factor anywhere in the state today. Weak trough west of Shimian Attu being held back at least temporarily by high pressure. And for tonight, that'll continue to be the case. Most of that moisture will just graze shimmy and at too, with the main rain-producing cloud staying back toward that main front that's just barely on the picture. Otherwise, the western Bering and Aleutians, central Aleutians under the influence of high pressure. Low pressure slowly dropping southeastward keeps it unsettled and damp over the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutian areas. Low clouds, fog, IFR flying conditions will occur anywhere over the Aleutians, Bristol Bay, all the Bering Sea up through the Strait and along the Arctic coast. Thunderstorms will end this evening. Showers will slowly diminish, but again won't end completely over the interior areas, with less rainfall, but still showery for the northern panhandle. Outlook for tomorrow, look for thunderstorms develop once again, with considerable areas of showers from the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, all the way down to the North Gulf Coast across Copper River Basin. Mostly cloudy showers, southeast coast, chance of thunderstorms all the way down the Kuskokwim River Valley toward Bethel, and up over the area just south of the Brooks Range there along that trough axis, back up toward Arctic Village once again. Otherwise, no change from the North Slope and Arctic coast for Monday, with high pressure over the Bering Sea ridging up to that 1,018 millibar high near Wrangel Island. So light northerly wind flow along the west coast, and light rain, fog, and drizzle just hangs on for the Alaska Peninsula, but amounts will be quite light, and look for maybe some clearing on the south side of the eastern Aleutians with that northerly wind flow. Basically dry, but variable amounts of clouds or Kodiak Island. I think the fog will stay offshore, maybe. And then for Tuesday, fair chance of showers there for Kodiak with mostly cloudy skies. And looks like thunderstorms will be most concentrated along a trough extending from the 1,001 millibar low over the eastern interior there on down in toward northeast Bristol Bay along the Alaska Range. Not so much over the Talkeetnas or Copper River Basin. Looks basically dry for south central Alaska with partly sunny skies, as well as the North Gulf Coast. Same forecast for the Panhandle, dry in the north. Now, front pushing a chance of rain into the southern southeast coast, especially in the afternoon. And another front out west, the low pressure area, just grazing the central and western Aleutians with the precipitation field there. Otherwise, high pressure continues to control the Bering Sea, Bering Straits, as well as the Arctic coast and North Slope. Looking at low temperatures tonight, upper 20s, lower 30s there for the Arctic coast, milder over the North Slope, upper 40s near 50 in the interior, mid 40s southern Alaska, upper 40s Kodiak Island, lower 40s out in the Aleutians, and just a tad under 40 for the Pribilofs. Highs tomorrow well into the 70s in the central interior, even Bethel pushing up towards 70 degrees with upper 50s to lower 60s south central Alaska. Staying in the 50s, lower to mid 50s for the Copper River Basin with the clouds and showers, and 50s for the Panhandle as well. Highs right around the frost point there for Wainwright and the Barrow area. Otherwise, closer to 40 for Kaktovik, but Shishmaref forecast high just 32 degrees, but mid 40s for the Pribilofs. Lows following morning, about the same up north, upper 20s, lower 30s along the Arctic coast, lower to mid 50s from the central Tanana Valley on up into the Yukon Flats, near 50 for the northern Kuskokwim Valley, otherwise in the 40s everywhere else, and near 40 for the Pribilofs, lower 30s there for St. Lawrence Island, followed by highs again in the 70s from the upper Yukon Valley right on down the Yukon and Kuskokwim River valleys out toward the southwest coast, but mostly in the upper 60s over the Delta. A little bit warmer for south central Alaska and 55 to 60 in the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, IFR, Arctic coast, ways inland over the North Slope. Marginal VFR in closer to the Brooks Range, but IFR through the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island, just about all of the Bering Sea except the southwest Bering. Aleutians, IFR, Alaska Peninsula, IFR up to west of Port Hayden, but IFR on up into Togiak Bay. VFR from Iliamna Lake to Kodiak Island and back to IFR, Prince William Sound and inland with marginal VFR to the Talkeetnas. And starting out IFR all the way up into the Northway Tok area, but the marginal VFR not quite making it to Eagle, marginal VFR for the Panhandle. And the afternoon Monday, that becomes VFR for the southeast coast. IFR hangs tough along the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and into the Wrangell Mountains. Some marginal VFR a little farther north, but the interior basically VFR. IFR for the most part out over the Bering Sea, and especially the Aleutians through the Bering Strait, and either marginal or IFR for the North Slope and Arctic coast. And for Tuesday morning, socked in IFR again on the forecast here for the North Slope Arctic coast. Just about all the Bering Sea except a small swath there out over the middle of nowhere, well west of the Pribilos, well north of Shimianatu. Aleutians, all IFR, Bristol Bay, right up to the coastline, IFR, southwest coast, same thing. Marginal VFR, east and south of the Alaska Range, that becomes IFR, Central Copper River Basin from eastern Matanuska Valley, say Tanita Pass eastward, IFR, but VFR for the southeast coast. And for the afternoon, VFR for the Panhandle area, some marginal or some IFR actually right along the coast of Prince of Wales Island, eastern North Gulf Coast, IFR, southern Kenai Peninsula, especially Port Moller, Seldovia, maybe Homer, marginal VFR up to say Kenai, and then VFR, northern Cook Inlet, much of the interior, some marginal VFR on the North Slope, no change out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And at Tuvik tomorrow, VFR, risk of thunderstorms in the afternoon, and Adigan, VFR as well, with thunderstorms popping up by midday through the afternoon. And Lake Clark and Merrill starting out marginal VFR, becoming VFR, basically a VFR kind of day. It could be some marginal conditions at times for both passes, and rainy VFR. For windy, same forecast, VFR tomorrow. Isabel, possible marginal VFR southern entrance, otherwise staying good. And Mentasta, VFR trending toward marginal VFR, it looks like, with building thunderstorms. Building cumulus could result in a thunderstorm. And for Tanita, eastern entrance, we'll see the lowest conditions. Otherwise, out the west side will be VFR. And Portage, marginal VFR with IFR in the eastern entrance. Chilkoot and White, marginal, becoming VFR. Freezing levels, about 8,000 feet over the eastern interior. Really not much of a gradient, 6,000 to 8,000 feet over, well, from the northern Bering Sea. Cooler air aloft there, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula and into the Panhandle, about 4,000 feet. Icing, batch of rime icing pushing in toward the far western Aleutians with the next frontal boundary coming in, but just barely reaching the area. And then areas of mixed icing, especially over the southeast interior. Some of that could be considerable moderate, and then some icing potential exists over the Panhandle and up along the Brooks Range and just east and south of the Yukon River. Jet stream, several upper level lows, none of which are very strong. Arctic coast near Norton Sound, over the Bering Strait, and a couple out over the Bering Sea. That's keeping the Pacific jet south of the area, 100 to 120 knots. They're going in south of the Queen Charlotte, so thinking it'll get 9,000 feet. We've got a weak low over the interior, so light wind flow, northerlies maybe 10 to 20 across the western Seward Peninsula, and maybe a little brisker there for the eastern Aleutians, but light winds for the Panhandle and the central Aleutians as well. Winds try to come up, but it probably won't be until tomorrow evening for the far western Aleutians with that next system. Otherwise, weak low pressure over the interior, so we've got northerly flow, light northerly flow through the Bering Strait down the eastern Bering Sea to the Fox Islands, and light variable winds just about everywhere else across the mainland and the Panhandle. Turbulence, possible considerable moderate turbulence for small aircraft there for the Fox Islands, and then increasing turbulence for the far western Aleutians. Otherwise, pretty smooth everywhere else. After the break.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks, where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's the Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks, Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis, not much different from yesterday. Still a little bit of ice left in the Norton Sound area, and the heavier ice doesn't look to be as extensive as it was yesterday or Friday on the north side or the northeast side of St. Lawrence Island, and that sea ice free area a little farther north of the Bering Strait than it has been. Otherwise, for the next several days, 4 or 5 days, everything will continue to do a slow dissolve. And for the coastal water forecast, south coast, not too bad. South to southeast, only 10 knots of seas at 4 feet. A little breezier up north, where southerlies will be 15 to 20 knots with 5-foot seas. Lynn Canal, again, the afternoon could see higher gusts, otherwise sustained at 20 knots, and seas at 4 feet. Stevens Passage, south at 10, and Clarence Strait, south 15. For Tuesday, kind of a light variable to northerly wind pattern for the northern central inside waters at 10 knots or less, and seas pretty slight. Southeast 15 for Clarence Strait. East-southeast 20 knots for the south coast, and east-northeast 10 to 15 for the north coast. Prince William Sound, light east winds tomorrow 10 knots, and for the eastern North Gulf Coast, southwest at 10. Southeast 10 on the west side. Barren Islands, light winds southwest at 10 knots with 3-foot seas. Kamishak Bay, southern Cook Inlet, southerlies at 15 knots, 3 to 5-foot seas, and northern Cook Inlet, southwest at 15. Those will be lighter on Tuesday, south to southwest 10 knots for all of Cook Inlet, seas 3 feet. Kamishak Bay, southwest at 10, and southwest 10 knots for the Barren Islands. Variable winds 10 knots for the North Gulf Coast, really laid down windwise there, as well as Prince William Sound, variable to north at 10 with seas running 2 feet. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 15 knots, seas 3 to 4 feet. Northeast at 10 for Bristol Bay. Small craft advisories on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. Northeast 25 knots, seas 5 feet, but south side, lighter easterlies at 15 knots with 5-foot seas. Outlook for Tuesday, the peninsula, west winds 15 knots, seas 4 to 5 feet, and those westerly winds at 15 knots all the way up to Sitkinak, and then south to south or west to southwest at 10 for Kodiak, and Bristol Bay southwest 15 with 3-foot seas. Fox Islands tomorrow, northerlies 30 to 35 knots, strongest south of Unalaska Island with 8 to 9-foot seas. There are small craft advisories also for Unmac Island for northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Northerlies 15 for Adak and Atka. And then from Kiska to Shemya, winds in the afternoon increasing to east 25 knots as that next front approaches. Those will continue and definitely windier across the western central Aleutians with gale warnings on the zones south of Adak and Atka. Small craft advisories otherwise 25 to 30 knots out of the east and southeast. Easterlies increasing to 20 to 25 knots for Unmak Island in the afternoon. Otherwise, Unalaska Island lighter and more westerly at 10 to 15 knots. Southwest coast, north to northwest, 20 knots, 4-foot seas. Small craft advisories for 25-knot winds for the Pribilofs. Northwest 20 for St. Matthew Island. North 20 for St. Lawrence Island. And then for the Tuesday outlook, northerlies at 15 knots from the Bering Strait across St. Lawrence Island and along the Yukon Delta coast. Kuskokwim Delta coast, northwest at 20. And 15 knots out of the north of the Pribilofs with 4-foot seas, and even lighter for St. Matthew Island, down to 10 knots, and seas subsiding to 3 feet. Beaufort Sea coast on the central and east side, generally a northerly component for the entire stretch of the coastline at 10 knots, with seas in the open areas running 2 to 3 feet, and then 20-knot winds from Wales to Cape Thompson out of the north at 20 knots with 4-foot seas. And for Tuesday, bring the winds around to the west and maybe up to 15 knots with the far eastern zone there toward Barter Island to Demarcation Point. Otherwise, north to northwest, 10 knots, central coast and the west side, and then 15-knot winds there from Wales to Cape Thompson and northeast 15 to Cape Beaufort. And for tonight, again, thunderstorms ending this evening and showers lingering throughout the night but slowly decreasing. But staying rather wet over the eastern Copper River Basin, showery over the northern Panhandle, light rain, fog, and drizzle continue in the Alaska Peninsula. Next front again increases the wind and rain chances from Kiska to Shemya tomorrow afternoon. Thunderstorms again in the interior, possibly farther down the Kuskokwim River Valley. And Copper River Basin, thunderstorms, wet conditions, cool, showery and cool for the Panhandle. And for Tuesday, showers along a trough from the eastern interior to northeast Bristol Bay.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.